All right, guys, now we're going to go ahead and begin reading chapter 10. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess about how he come to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said, he might come and haunt us. He said that a man weren't buried was more than likely to go haunted around than one that was planted and comfortable. Well, that sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more. But I couldn't keep from studying over it and wishing I'd known who'd shot the man and what they'd done it for. We rummaged the clothes we'd got and found $8 in silver sewed up in the lining of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned the people in that house stole the coat because if they'd known the money was in there, they wouldn't have left it. I said I reckon they killed him too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched in the snakeskin that I found at the top of the ridge the day before yesterday? You said it was the worst bad luck in the world to touch a snakeskin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in all this truck and $8 besides. I wish we could have some more bad luck like this every day, Jim. So we get a little bit of Huck's sarcasm in the face of Jim's superstitions. Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a-comin'. Mind you, I tell you, it's a-comin'. It did come, too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday, we was laying around in the grass at supper at the upper end of the ridge and got out of tobacco. I went to the cavern to get some and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him and curled him up at the foot of Jim's blanket, ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun when Jim found him there. Well, by night I forgot all about the snake, and when Jim flung himself down on the blanket while I struck a light, the snake's mate was there and bit him. He jumped up, yelling, and the first thing the light showed was the varmint curled up and ready for another spring. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pap's whiskey jug and began to pour it down. Well, he was barefoot, and the snake had bit him right on the heel. And that all comes of my being such a fool as to not remember that wherever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls around it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then the skin and body and roast a piece of it. I done it, and he eat it, and he said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles and tie them around his wrists, too. He said that would help. And then I slid out quiet and throwed the snakes clear amongst the bushes, for I wasn't going to let Jim find out that it was all my fault. Not if I could help it. Well, Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now he got out of his head and pitched around and yelled, but every time he come to himself, he went to sucking at the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big, and so did his leg. By and by, the drunk begun to come, and so I judged it was all right, but I'd rather been bit with a snake than Pap's whiskey. Well, Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone, and he was around again. I made up my mind I would never take a hold of snakeskin again with my hands now that I see what had come of it. Jim said he reckoned that I would believe him next time, and he said that handling a snakeskin was such awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got the end of it yet. He said that he'd rather see a new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times than take up a snakeskin in his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself, though I'd always reckoned that looking at a new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolishest things a body can do. Old Hank Bunker did it once and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years he got drunk and fell off the shot tower and spread himself out so that he was just kind of a layer, as you might say. And they slid him edgeways between 2 barn doors for a coffin and buried him so they say. But I didn't see it. Pap told me. But anyway, it all come of looking at the moon that way, like a fool. We see them both earning that sort of superstitious badge here. Well, the days went along, the river went down between its banks again, and about the first thing we done was try to bait one of the big hooks with a skinned rabbit and set it to catch catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighed over 200 pounds. We couldn't handle him, of course. He would have flung us into Illinois. We just sat there and we watched him rip and tear until he drowned. Found a brass button in his stomach and a round ball and lots of rubbish. We split the ball open with a hatchet, and there was a spool in it. Jim said it had been there a long time to coat it over in so much and make a ball of it. It was as big a fish as I'd ever catched in Mississippi, I reckon. Jim said he had never seen a bigger one. He would have been worth a good deal over at the village. They peddle out such a fish about the pound at the market there. Everybody buys some of him. His meat's as white as snow and makes a good fry. Well, the next morning I said it was getting slow and dull, and I wanted to get a stir some way. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked that notion, but he said I mustn't go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied over and said, couldn't I put on some of the old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion, too. So we shortened up one of the calico gowns, and I turned up my trouser legs to my knees, and I got into it. And Jim hitched it behind with the hooks, and it was a fair fit. I put on the sunbonnet, and I tied it under my chin, and then for a body to look and see my face was like looking down a joint of a stovepipe. Jim said nobody would know me, even in the daytime, hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of things, and by, I could do pretty well in them. Only Jim said I didn't walk like a girl. He said I must quit pulling up my gown and get at my breeches pocket. I took notice, and I done better. I started up the Illinois shore in the canoe just after dark. I started across town from the little below the ferry landing, and the drift of the current fetched me at the bottom of the town. I tied up and I started along the bank. There was a light burning in a little shanty that hadn't been lived in for a long time, and I wonder who had took up the quarters there. I slipped up and I peeped in the window. There was a woman about 40 years old in there, knitting by candle that was on a pine table. I didn't know her face. She was a stranger, for you couldn't start at a face in that town that I didn't know. Well, this was lucky, because I was weakening. I was getting afraid that I had come. People might know my voice and find me out. But if this woman had been in such a little town 2 days, she could tell me all I could know. So I knocked at the door and made up my mind I wouldn't forget I was a girl. So it's interesting here. Huck says, next morning, it was getting slow and dull. Well, what do we make of this? What does that say about Huck as a person? He's been living pretty comfortably out on this island. He's got his friend Jim there. They're out hunting and cooking and seem to be living just fine, but he needs to stir up a little something. He needs to have an adventure. Well, what do we think is going to happen next? Dressed up as a girl, he knocks on somebody's door to do what? So as we get ready to read chapter 11 tomorrow, guys, start making those predictions. At this point, make sure that you do answer at least one of the questions here on slide 38 for your real talk response in your text analysis. Y'all have a wonderful day. See you soon.